Okay, should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah.
Okay, I think just to start off, I wanted to kind of read a little intro, like introduce you, and then a little event description. So, yeah, thanks to everyone for being here. We're super excited to have Arquay here with us. So, if you don't know, Arquay is the VP of Engineering at Webflow. Prior to Webflow, she held engineering leadership positions at Slack, Google, and CBS Interactive. A developer who also has a master's in design, Arquay loves the marriage of form and function. And when not working, she can be found cooking, stumbling over guitar and piano chords, or watching Seinfeld. Seinfeld. I wrote it wrong.
No, you're good.
Okay. Yeah. And then, yeah, really quick before we get started, also the event description. So this today is a fireside chat with Arquay Harris, VP of Engineering at Webflow. Today we'll hear about her non-traditional journey into tech and learn about how her unconventional background frames her unique perspective on inclusivity and leadership. Okay, awesome. So, okay, we'll just get started. I guess we'll jump right into the questions then. So to get started, can you tell me a bit about your career journey and what led you to become interested in tech and how you eventually ended up at Webflow?
Yeah. And by the way, I was laughing just because I need to update my pop culture references. I think the last episode was 20 years ago or something, but it's a classic. Yeah, so I have very much a non-traditional traditional background in that I didn't start off knowing that I wanted to be a software developer, knowing that I wanted to major in computer science or anything like that. I grew up kind of in the DC area. And I really saw math and science as this great equalizer. Like coming from pretty humble backgrounds, you could effectively like math your way out of poverty. And so very young, I had this really, really strong interest in math. I was president of Mu Alpha Theta. I was on the math team. Like I just really loved it. And so I went to school originally because I wanted to be a mathematics teacher. I wanted to teach math to 7th and 8th graders and really kind of instill that love of math into a newer generation. And then I had an after school job where I got introduced to Illustrator and Photoshop. And I just really like loved it. I was like, what is this? This is perfect marriage of creativity and also computers, which I'd always loved as well. And so then later when I was in school as a math major, I decided like, yeah, I'm really most engaged. I'm really most excited when I'm doing this kind of art stuff and I'm in my dorm room, drawing an Illustrator drawing of Mulan or Ariel or something like that. So I transferred schools and I majored in something called media arts and design. And now you're probably right now at this point of the story being like, okay, this all sounds very strange. When do we get to the coding part? And what I ended up doing in that major was everything from shooting video to doing sound, and my concentration, which was digital illustration. And then I ended up like graduating with media arts and design, and then I moved out to California to do graduate school. And so even though I'm a VP of engineering, I actually am a classically trained designer. I have an MFA, and in grad school I did fine art painting and 3D and all of these things. And so I got interested in coding to begin with in undergrad because when I would create like the design for a website or some interactive project, right, I didn't like this process of taking my design and handing it off to someone else. I always felt like something gets lost in the translation. This isn't exactly what I want. And so I started doing Flash development. I know like this is my litmus test. I'm pretty sure like people there's gonna be a certain point when people are not gonna know what Flash is.
Yeah, that took me a second. Like, what is Flash?
Yeah. Flash. I love it. But I started doing Flash, and it's basically like the way to do like animations. And they had this kind of proprietary thing called ActionScript, which effectively is JavaScript. And so I started doing that. And then I got into PHP and Python. And so I think that having that kind of non-traditional path to tech has really been an advantage for me, because I can have these really informed conversations with designers about typography and layout and grid, because I am a designer, but I also am an engineer, and I know how things need to be built. And so I think it's much less common now, but in the early aughts, it was much more common to be this kind of developer designer. And I really wanted to do both. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the journey that led me to tech. And so then afterwards I worked at a media company, CBS, CNET, which became CBS Interactive for a while. And then I went on to Google and then Slack and now Webflow.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess, so were there any key moments in your career that you feel like, I guess, just like were really defining for you or led to a big change? Yeah, or maybe impact you today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say early career and when I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do. I think one of the reasons why I'm really interested in outreach and mentoring and talking to certain demographics like URG groups and URM groups is because I think in a lot of cases, if you can't see yourself doing anything, like you literally don't see people who look like you doing the things that you would like to do, you can't conceive that it is something that is possible for you, right? And so early on when I was thinking about tech, there's this prototype of what it means to be an engineer, and it's just like kind of like a geeky, like white guy, like
Right.
Revenge of the Nerds or Weird Science or something like that. This thing of it's really hard, and similarly to the way that I love math, I was really drawn to that, which is something that girls are told math is hard kind of thing. I really looked at it where when I first started learning to code, I really would have moments where I'd be like, I don't think this is for me. I don't think my brain can do code. Like, this is really hard. Like, I don't like, because you inevitably, when you first learn a new thing, it's really exciting and you're like, oh, it's so fun. And then you hit that point where it gets really hard and
Right.
because you're inexperienced, you don't know what to do. And so I think the kind of defining moment for me was we were very much raised to be like, you can do anything. If you just have hard work and discipline, you can do it. Just put the hours in. And I began to look at other people and think, well, there's something magical about those people, right? Like they didn't just drop from the sky and know how to do Scala and and C and all these things. They learn like everyone else. And
Right.
so I felt like if they can learn how to do a thing, I can do it too. And so I had to get past this kind of self-imposed mental barrier that I had set for myself of like, this isn't for you, or these aren't the types of things that you can do. So that was really defining because it really started to shape how I viewed not just myself in that moment, but just my approach to learning in general, right? Like we read a lot about things like imposter syndrome and, all of the stuff. And it's like, sure, but knowledge doesn't really work like that. No one knows everything. You take the best person at anything in the world, there's still something that person is better or worse at. And we all just have things that we can use. It's hard work and discipline. You can kind of overcome a lot with that.
Right. Yeah, I think so many girls like deal with what you just described, like thinking that like there's no one that looks like them in this field or might not be for them. What do you think like really helped you shift your mindset and realize that like you could do it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wish there was more. The advice that I would give to people today is find a support community. I think in the 20 or so years that I've been in this industry, it's changed quite a lot. And there are things like, Black Girls Code and Girls Who Code. And the thing I just did, Code with Class C, like so many organizations that are targeted towards URG, URM, that type, like different communities. And so it really is important to find that support system so that when it does become hard, you can go and run to someone or have someone help you out. And so I think that for me though, at that time, I think, I don't know, like some kind of fortitude, maybe like deep perseverance. And also I think, I did have some support community, like people who helped me out at that time. I think that's the best way because everyone's going to have that down moment where you just are doubting everything. And it's like, maybe I should just move to Peru and, work at a potato farm or something. Or you're like doubting yourself. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, I think that's a great answer. Um, so I guess kind of related or building off that, how have you seen the role of women and in tech and minorities in tech generally evolve throughout your career?
Oh, so much.
Mhm.
I think I often tell this story about how when I was younger, we're from the same area, Lizzie. Uh, I I love school. I was like a super student, K through 12. I had perfect attendance. Like I love school, love this idea of learning. I just had really great teachers throughout my life, and that's why I wanted to become an educator, just to give back and to help the way that I was helped. Um, but when it came time to like plan my future, I remember when we do the whole college application process and stuff, and part of college application process, I'm glad now that we have, the single app and all that stuff, but um, you had to pay. You had to pay for college
Yeah,
applications.
it's
They're expensive.
expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of the colleges that I applied to, probably the number one criteria was free application. Does it have a free application
Mhm.
fee? And so I remember having a conversation with someone where, and this is the thing that I talk about a lot, but I was talking with someone about schools, and I said that I knew that like Harvard was a place, or Yale, or any of these Ivy Leagues were a place. Like I knew the moon was a place, right? And what I mean by that is, yeah, like these places exist. Like the solar system also exists. I know that is real. But had never really seen people like me doing those things. I'd never seen a Black software engineer. I'd never worked with a Black female software engineer until I went to till maybe like 15 years into my career, which is
Oh,
shocking.
wow. Yeah.
Um, and so I think if you think about that, like one of the early teams that I was on, I was the only woman, only Black person, and that's just very interesting. So I used to ask. I asked one of my white male colleagues one day. I said, imagine if every single day for 20 years you had to go to work, and every single person that you work with was a woman, like every one of them, no men at the company. And now imagine that every single one of those women was Black. And every day so one of two things would happen. You would either completely lose sense of yourself, right? Or you would try to assimilate. You try to get yourself some braids or something. You would be like, why are they always talking about what is scandal exactly? I don't get it. They're pop culture references. You would be completely lost, right? And that is the reality for so many of us every single day that we like. It is just the thought is you can't even probably make that mental picture in your mind of what that would look like, right?
Right,
And
right.
that's the reality. And so when you ask me if the face of technology is changing, oh, absolutely it is, right? The fact that you and I are having this conversation, and I lead an engineering organization, that in and of itself is changing. And I feel like what was my journey for, if not to make it easier for those behind me, that is something I fundamentally believe. And so while we have a ways to go, it is absolutely much better than it was when I first started out.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah, no, that's great. And that mental picture, like, yeah, I've never thought about it like that. Like, I think it's actually so jarring to think um, that it, like, the opposite of what we experience as,
Yeah,
like, minorities in tech would, yeah, it's just, like, so different than what it looks like today.
right.
Um, yeah, so I guess to talk a little bit about your current experience, like, leading an engineering department, as you mentioned, what would you say like your leadership style is, and how are you kind of, I guess, encouraging inclusivity of like minorities and women in tech at Webflow?
Yeah. Um, One of the reasons why I took this role, aside from the fact that Webflow is a great company with great people, I love the product. The product is interesting because it's this intersection of all the things we were just talking about. It's
Right.
design and technology and code, right? Um, so it was an opportunity to lead an organization with all of the ideals that you develop over time, sort of the fundamental principles and practices. And that was really appealing to me. And the other thing is that what I spent a lot of time with the founders and kind of understanding the people in the company to understand what I was joining. And the VP of product, who's my main peer, is also a woman of color. Her name's Gianna Zhang, and she's Jay-Z, we call her. She's like amazing. And yeah, and so I couldn't even think of another example where a company has two of the quote like most powerful people at the company, and they're both women of color. And that right there was like and Jay-Z's the best, like just, total partnership, no drama, like super great to work with her every day. And so when I think about the type of organization that I want to build, from the very moment that I started at the company, every single month that I've been at the company, I've done some sort of outreach event, because statistically, when you are trying to recruit from underrepresented groups, it takes longer. Like you have to build the relationship. So everything from like, Girl Geek to Blackest Tech to Next Play to Afro Tech, like all these things, like just having events or showing up at events, having us be a presence, because that's really important to me because it's not just like, oh, we need to have a diverse engineering team and just magically overnight that happens. Right. You have to really put in the work, and you have to make it a place where people of all types can thrive. And so I think in terms of, putting that into practice, at any company that I've ever worked at, two places where I spend a lot of time intentionally are recruiting, but also promotion. Because you have to make sure that you're seeing people through the pipeline. If you go out and you say like, oh, we partnered with Hackbright, or we did, we Code 2040, all these things, and you really beef up that pipeline. But then over time, if you extrapolate that, the people who are the diversity within your organization is at the effectively lower levels. Like you're not making it so that those people can like progress and thrive and get promoted, then you're only doing half the job. So you have to make sure that you have process that is equitable. Do you have mentorship programs? Are you setting them up with coaches? These types of things, because the challenges will be different, right? As we were just talking about, that whole feeling of alienation and marginalization, the mental chess game that people have to go through, those are things that do not exist for every demographic. And so I think those are two of the ways that I try to kind of, instill that within my organization. And then it's also the adage of people watch what you do, not what you say. That's super true, right? Intention has to match. Action has to match intention, right? Everybody has best intentions. We all can say like we want to do the right thing, and we want to like have diversity in places and all of the stuff. But like if you just say that all the time, but nothing changes year after year, then that shows there's a problem with your action not matching your intention. And so I try to really be conscious of that too, which is if I say that I want these things, what am I actually doing? And what do people see me doing? What am I talking about? And also, what do I incentivize within my organization? So meaning like, am I incentivizing just like, brilliant jerks? Am I not prioritizing diverse pipelines, that type of thing?
Wow. Yeah. I think that's really inspiring. Like those are two like really important points for basically, like increasing representation in tech. Do you think, I know a lot of companies, I think, have these good intentions of like increasing diversity in their tech departments, but I think progress is very slow. Kind of like similar as you mentioned. So yeah, what do you think are some of like the big challenges that are stopping tech companies from really like carrying out these promises that they have, or these like good intentions?
Oof, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I think so. The first part of it is, if you think about the way that tech companies start, like most tech companies start, you have like a great idea, you have a couple of founders, and you start with your friend group. You're like, I want to do a thing. Who do you know? And you start to bring in your circle. And most people's lives are homogenous, right? Like just in general, like if you pick any person in this room and you poll their friends, either from a racial standpoint, from a gender standpoint, from a socioeconomic standpoint, right? Like you're going to pick, that is part of human survival, right? You are going to pick people who are similar to you. And so then what happens over time is you have the kind of like 7 white dudes problem, right? Where once you hire 7 white dudes at a company, nothing wrong with white dudes, not saying that, just saying that it becomes not just a little bit more harder to have diversity in that organization, it becomes exponentially more difficult, because at that point, nobody wants to be the first. I don't want to be your first woman. I don't want to be your first Black person, right? Because you like what they're already reading from that culture is homogeny, right? So then over time, that group of 7 to 12 founders have been there the longest. They have the most say at the company. You know, that long tenure thing starts to become an issue. So again, extrapolate, right? So then I think the problem is not that people, you know, don't want to. It's just you have to, even just like how it starts. You're already starting off from a different place, right? So how do you fix it then, right? Like there's no kind of easy answer on how you fix it, but I think the intentionality has to start early, right? Like don't wait until it's like, well, we have our first 100 people or our first 200 people, and then we start thinking about it. No, you got to start early, and you got to start doing the things that. So, for example, I really believe in this whole distance traveled situation where, you know, let's say you had a college grad. And this person maybe had to take care of their like elderly parent. They had a track scholarship, and they had like, you know, a 3.2 average. That distance travel and that person's first generation college, right? Like that's really a harder barrier to overcome than maybe someone who like, you know, had like a easier path in life, right?
Yeah.
So and then the other thing is thinking about our own unconscious biases and the way that we view you know, people's qualifications for things. Like we'll do the whole thing of like, I don't know, that person's never done this thing before, so should we give that person a chance? Or we'll put job descriptions for director roles or VP roles, or we'll say, I would like someone who has like led a team of 1,000 and who has worked you know, worked in the industry for 10 or 15 years. Well, that's going to be like, that's not going to be a woman or a person of color, because that just was not really possible 15 years ago. So I think there's just a lot of factors in play. If I had, I don't know that I have the magic answer. It's really hard, but I think just, you know, little actions can move mountains. If we are just try a little bit more every single day, whether it's changing your interview process, how you do job JDs, how you promote people internally, the type of representation that you have, you know, those things can make really meaningful impact over time.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Those are really great points. And I think it's great to see how you're kind of like making all those like little incremental improvements at Webflow. Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can sort of pivot back to talking about your like career path. So I think, okay, I'll move to this question. Were there times when you were not sure where your career path would take you, and or when it took a different path than you had planned? And what did those things like end up teaching you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that very often in life, your career is not a straight line, right? Like I did this thing, and then I did that and that and that and up. Like it's usually like this, like, you know, curvy thing, and it takes different twists and turns. And so, for example, when I was at CNET, I became a director of engineering for the first time, and I did a really odd trajectory. I went from director of engineering, and then I joined Google, but I joined Google as an IC. And that is a very odd trajectory, because, you know, you reach this level, and it's even actually an odd thing. People often won't even hire you to be an IC after you've been a director, because it's like, oh, that person hasn't coded in 25 years or whatever. But for me, it was great. Like I really loved just kind of doing the IC thing again. And then I eventually got back into leadership, and then I joined Slack, and I didn't join Slack as a director. I joined as a senior manager. And then, you know, it's just the point being that the way that I tried to look at my career was, you know, what are the opportunities? Will I learn something? Will I grow? It's not just like, am I trying to get like higher and higher title or money or team size or whatever? It was really about for me, the interest of the opportunity. I think I used to talk a lot about like self-advocacy, and I would ask people, it's a common thing to ask people, like, what is your 5-year plan, right? Like, what do you, and I think the way that I try to flip it is I say, like, what is your highest aspiration for yourself? Because if you say someday I want to be a CEO of my own company, I want to start my own company, I want to be a founder, maybe, versus someday I would like to be chief architect. Those are very different, highest aspirations. One will require an incredible breadth of information, and one will require a depth of information. And so if I someday know that I want to be CEO, maybe I would take different types of jobs. I might get an MBA. I might, figure out business things and the tech, versus if I want to be a chief architect, I got to go deep on something. Right. And that doesn't mean that, again, your career is going to be this straight line, but you at least have some idea of like where you're trying to go. You can see it in the distance, and you know where you're trying to go. Now, you don't know the path exactly, but I think that to me is just like the way that I try to think about it. And so for me, when I think about my career, it was never about like, oh, I want to be the CTO, or I want to be, because in fact, to be honest, I never really wanted to be the VP either. I love it. Don't get me wrong. But what I mean by that is the thing that I really loved about engineering leadership in particular is I love this kind of one-on-one, like the connecting to people, the ability to mentor, the ability to like force multiply. That I could be like a really great engineer, but if I could help other people reach their fullest potential, nothing's better than that. And then those people teach other people, and those, right, like a mentor doesn't stand in your way kind of thing, where I really want to be able to, and if, look at this, this is like an Oprah moment, where if you think about it, it really goes back to the teaching thing. Right? Like reflecting back to those people who had helped me and instilled that sort of confidence and determination. Like that's the thing that really appealed to me. And so in my mind, when I thought about what it meant to be a CTO or VP, it's like a VP manages like directors who manage managers who manage IC. It was so far removed. It's an entirely different job.
Yeah.
Now, and also the archetype of what like a CTO is Andy Grove, who is this famous Intel person who wore like, blue shirt and khaki pants. So the last thing I'll say on this is, when you do think about that question, I think it is possible to, it is, you should reevaluate it. Because if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I'd have been like, I never want to be a VP. But then I'm like, no, well, it depends on the company, right? because my mental model of what I thought that job meant, this refers back to the question that you asked me about, is technology changing? Because whereas before I couldn't conceive of a person like me doing this job, because my impression of what that job meant didn't match who I thought that I was, right? Like if you've I've never seen a Black woman, VP of engineering of like a unicorn company, right? And so, but now I'm like, oh, I can do that then. Like, I am now changing what my highest aspiration is based on new information. Yeah. And so I challenge people to not be afraid to do that as well.
Yeah, I think it's super cool to see how your aspirations change from, when you like a lot earlier wanting to be a teacher, and how you're still kind of bringing in that mindset into like your later roles of like being a manager, helping people reach their fullest potential. Super cool. Yeah, so I guess to elaborate a little bit, to go a little more in depth on like why each of those like roles you went to, like Google, Slack, CBS, do you have any, I guess, what would you say were the things you wanted to learn, like when you joined each of those, or maybe just pick one and talk about it?
Yeah. So in between Google and Slack, I was kind of semi-retired for a while. I just for like about 3 years. So when you get into technology, a lot of us get into it because we like the problem solving, like the sort of coding, all the stuff. And so I just took time and I did a bunch of stuff. So I wrote like an Android app and an iPhone app, and I did stuff in React and Angular and like all the things. And then I took a bunch of classes. Like for example, I took CS50, Harvard's course, which I'm sure you're familiar with. That class is dope. It's amazing. It's so fun. I did the Mario game. I did the whole thing. I took MIT's algorithms class, which is fun. And by the way, as a side tangent, right, like that has been really fantastic and amazing to see just how technology is really democratizing information and learning. Like you just basically need an internet connection and you can learn anything. You could take Stanford's iOS class and it's all free and it's all online, right? Like whereas that was just not possible for people years ago. And I think that is just really great to see. So that said, so I just kind of was like doing all the fun stuff, not for money, just like for myself, just learning tech, doing great things. And then traveling, like I went to like Portugal and Spain, India, and like I just went to a bunch of places. Yeah. And so then when I joined Slack, I would say I was not actively looking for a role, but they had a recruiting event there. It was really great. And I love the company and their diversity numbers were just outrageous. I thought they were made up. They really had really approached diversity in a way that I had not seen at a tech company. And the product is awesome. I think the product is fun. I mean, most people, back then not so much, but now pretty much most places use Slack. And so for me, that was just like a really, it was like an interesting opportunity. And I think similarly, when I joined Webflow, right, everything that I learned about the business, right, like they have like a great business plan. The product is fantastic. People are just so passionate about Webflow University. They love the videos, right? And so I think the parallel between those two experiences is like what really piques my curiosity is when people have passion about a product, right? Like people are paying for a product, a piece of software, but they love it, right? And so for me, I think that doesn't just happen. I think that says something also about the people who are building. It's like the love is baked into the cake kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like if people are miserable and horrible, that's going to come out in your product. Right. I'm not going to name names, but like you could just put something that are just painful to use, like really horrible software. And so I think that is something that is a big determining factor for me when I'm thinking about these big crucial kind of life decisions or changes in trajectory. Oh yeah. I'm sorry. I was looking at the chat and that's right. I forgot they extended it because I know someone who worked on the Yale version of CS50.
Right.
Yeah.
It's super cool. Yeah, actually I've heard about Slack that they're one of those companies that like from the very beginning, they were like very focused on like kind of diversity and like building a good team and like inclusive team. Yeah.
Totally.
That's great. Okay, let's just move to the next question then, I think. So based on your years of experience in a variety of different companies and capacities in the tech industry, what advice do you have for people interested in pursuing software engineering as a career?
I would say just code, right? Like when that seems like pretty basic advice, but what I mean is if your mom's canasta club asks you to do like their website for their group, do it, right? Like make them an app, make them an iPhone app for how they could like sign up for the canasta tournament, whatever it is, right? And because I think a lot of people will have this idea that they have to strive for perfection, right? Like, oh, I can't put this thing on my resume, or shouldn't talk about that thing because it was not significant, or I didn't get paid for it, or whatever. When really you learn by doing, right? Like even if you just did a little side project for a thing, that process of learning, of thinking through, of getting better, that's really how you do it. And I think this is the other thing that I think is worth talking about is one of my like kind of mentor peer person that I talked to, we were talking about how a lot of people go into certain fields because it's the field to do, right? Like if you go back, let's say you go like 20 years ago, maybe even more, the field was finance. It's like, I gotta be on Wall Street. I gotta like, that's like the job. And then it was like, oh, the attorney, like, that's the it job, right? And in the last 10 years or so, the it job is computer science. It's like, I gotta be an entrepreneur. I gotta be a founder. I gotta move out to the Valley and fundraise and all the stuff. And we grew up in the age of like Facebook and all that, right? And so I think so people what I see all the time with intern classes and young people is people do that because it's quote the job, it is quote the path, right?
Mhm.
And then they do it and then they don't like it.
Yeah.
They get into it and they're like, you know what, I want to be a PM. I'm like, do you? Okay, tell me why, right? Or they're like, or they spent all this time, they've gone to school, sometimes even graduate school, and then they actually are working professional developers. And what they think it is, they think it's maybe like Silicon Valley, the TV show, right? And it is a little bit like that, but but you know, there's a very big difference between the working reality. Like, you know, maybe writing unit tests isn't as awesome as you might maybe had thought, right? So I think so in addition to coding to get that level of proficiency, I think it very much behooves you to kind of understand what that job is. Ask the hard questions, right? And I do think, and don't be afraid to pivot, right? Like you know, it is not great if you feel like, oh, I've put all this effort in, but it is worse to do a thing that you end up not liking. Because that happens a lot too, where then people are like, oh, I guess I'm 10 years in or I'm 5 years in now. What am I going to do? I got a mortgage, right?
Right.
So I think do the internships, do hackathons, talk to people, professionals that you know who do the role to make sure that you actually understand what it is.
Yeah, I think that's good advice because I definitely know a lot of people who kind of are just doing software engineering and then like after a couple internships they're like, actually, I don't like coding. Like,
Exactly.
I want to be PM.
Exactly. It's like, this isn't always fun, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
definitely.
true.
Do you feel like you went through kind of a similar, kind of like a big shift, like you just mentioned when you, after getting your like MFA and going into tech, was that like a similar kind of shift?
I mean, not so much, not as much for me because the program that I was in. So when I was in grad school for art,
Mm-hmm.
one of the first classes I took first semester was like a Java class where we're doing MySQL and writing beans and stuff, right? Like there was coding built into the program, and so they were training us to kind of have that mesh of art and science, and so. Again, like I said, it's starting to come back a little bit now, but it was definitely, I wanted to be developer designer. I wanted to be like Jason Santamaria or even Ethan Marcotte to a certain extent. And, you know, like I was talking recently about CSS Zen Garden, I was obsessed with CSS Zen Garden. I always wanted to have like, which is this thing where you basically have a standardized piece of code and you make it look different every single day by just changing the CSS. And I remember seeing that as a kid, and I was just like, that's so awesome, and that's art. How are you able to do this? And so I was really fascinated. And so when I came out and started coding, it was always just so interesting to me what it could do, the power of it, right? Although I will say over time, I did gravitate to front-end engineering over full stack or even back-end engineering because I did like this ability to put something in people's hands. Okay. So this is actually, that's a good question that you asked, because one of the other things that I encourage people to do, all engineering is not the same, right? Like you can be a quality engineer, you can be back end, you can be front end, you can be an applicant, like just, you know, a native developer, like iOS or Electron or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's the other part of it too, is like some people will go and they'll be like, I want to make video games. And then they get into it and they're like, this actually is not fun at all. I don't like it, right? Or like they'll get into the quality or QA. And so that's another part of it too, is not just maybe you also like coding, or maybe you just don't like the type of coding that you were doing. Maybe you learned to do Java or something and it's just really painful for you, but maybe Python is more your speed. So understanding that as well is important.
Yeah, I think that's really not talked about as much. Like people kind of just consider software engineering, but there's actually a lot of like distinction.
Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we are at 3:40, so I think we wanted to kind of transition into like opening it up for Q&A from the audience. So maybe the WECode board members in the chat can also help us with this, but I think we're just opening it up to anyone in the audience to ask a question. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, so Cameron asks, what is one piece of advice you'd give your college self?
Ooh, college self. Oof. Get more sleep. No, no, that's kind of true. So I'm definitely first generation college, and so I had scholarships and stuff, but I also had to work a lot. Like there's one point in college where I think I had 4 jobs or something, and it was just like really hard. I worked at the computer lab and I did all the stuff, and I think in all seriousness, I would probably tell myself to like, take a minute, take a beat, right? Like I remember one time I would have to like wake up early and I had to walk all the way across campus, like across quad to get to one of my classes. And I remember because my main building was so far away there was like no dining halls over there or anything. And so I would like load up. I would get like turkey sandwiches and I'll put them in my backpack and then I put them in the fridge over there. And then I would just like stay in that building for like 12 hours. Because by the way, I'm old. So when I would be doing stuff, I'd have to like wait for these things called render times. Now everybody just has Final Cut Pro and it's like, look at this thing I made. It's like amazing in real time. It'd be like me, I'm making a movie and it's like, I'll see you in an hour when that thing's done rendering.
Wow.
So I spent a lot of time in computer labs. But one day I was walking across quad and it was such a beautiful day and there was just like a tree and it was like an empty tree. And I remember this so vividly like it was yesterday. I just sat down under the tree and I just like ate my turkey sandwich under the tree. It was like the best day. It's one of my best memories. And I was like, I've gone to school for like years. And I never sat under this tree or never sat here. And so the advice that I would give to my college self is like, chill, like I know you got a lot to do, but like maybe chill, maybe go to a step show or something, like just like take a chill day.
Yeah, that's good advice. Slow down and just kind of enjoy the experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting more questions.
Yeah.
Oh, Cameron says, thank you so much. So helpful. Okay, so Rishika asks, how do you suggest we can sensitize the people in our community to diversity and inclusion? A lot of people think diversity hiring means girls, for example, have less potential. How do you counter that?
Ooh, that is a good, hard question. Because one of a thing that I find myself combating, just in the world, like because I talk to a lot of peer managers or some of people who are my peers in industry will be like, oh, how do I diversify? Like you have a lot of experience doing this, so we'll have these like intellectual chats. And sometimes the trap that people fall into is they fall into like savior mode, right? And they infantilize certain groups, right? And that is more harmful, I think, than not having diversity at all. And so people will ask me all the time, they'll say like, oh, do you face a lot of discrimination for being Black in tech? And I'm always like, rarely, right? Like I know that biases exist and discrimination exists, but people are not going to be overtly racist in your face, generally speaking. And most people, maybe this is naive and optimistic, but I don't believe that most people are just innately racist like that, right? But sexist? Oh yeah. Like people, it's the bigotry of low expectation, right? Like people assuming that I can't code or that like girls in general aren't as good or whatever, any of these things. And so I think that when we look at sort of diversity and increasing that, it's in this like, oh, look at us. Like we were patting ourselves on the back. Look how many women we've hired at junior levels and aren't they cute? It's like, no, like that infantilization, that not giving them feedback, that not mentoring and coaching them and putting them in environments where they can actually thrive. Like, how is that helping? Right. And so I think that we do have to change how we view what diversity means. Right. And it's not just, I also think that people focus a lot on certain types of diversity as well. Right. So like they'll be like, oh, okay, like we need, so I used to work with some people. I'm putting out all my Harvard material, but I used to work with these people where every single person on the team was a person of color, and literally every single person went to Harvard, every one of them. And I was like, well, Like that's so right. Like diversity takes many forms, socioeconomic
Mhm.
background, right? Like, and so I think, and even people just lump, like they'll say like Asians, like they'll lump that into a group, and it's like,
Yeah.
you know, people, Vietnamese people are URMs in tech, and people from Thailand, you know, and so
That's true.
I think we really have to change what we mean, and it's really about goals. What are we trying to accomplish? Is it just that we checked a box and hired more women or hired
Mhm.
more Black people, or is it really about like different experiences and making for a richer culture and
Mhm.
ultimately like a richer product or output or whatever it is that we're trying to do?
Wow, yeah. No, that's a really good distinction because I think it's really easy to just be like, "Oh, yeah, we're doing better than last year. The numbers are higher." But then the experience or the overall goal is like not there.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Rishika, for the question. Yeah, she says thank you for the insights as well. Okay, so Bria also has a question. She asks, what are some ways that you pair your art background with coding at Webflow? I also love art and I would also like to use it within the field.
Yeah, I mean, at Webflow, it's really easy, I think, in some ways, because the product itself lends itself to that. And so, I was talking to some of my engineering managers recently, and one of my EMs, for example, every like 6 months or something, he will intentionally build a thing with Webflow, right? Like just build some kind of site to build empathy and to make sure that he's like well versed on the experiences that the users are having, right?
Mhm.
And so same for me, like on my screen right now, I always have the product open and I'm working through a tutorial or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And then the other way is, I think I loved it to talk about how I think coding is really creative. There is the stereotype of just the kind of worker bee person like hacking at a keyboard who's just this kind of like dork and not really capable of scintillating conversation about art or whatever. And really, coding is such a creative endeavor, right? There are so many ways to code a thing, and there's such elegance and beauty. And have you ever just made this like beautiful function that just is like just perfect, and it's concise and it's clear and all of these things? Like that takes incredible creativity to be able to do that. And I think that is a perspective that isn't often taken, but I really do believe that. And I think that level of problem solving, that way of using your brain in this really specific way, I think is this mixture of kind of art and science.
Yeah, I think it kind of is a mindset thing. Like you can approach it as like, oh, let me just get this done, like do these
Yeah,
tasks, or kind of like thinking about how you're structuring your code or like the best ways to do it. Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Does anyone in the chat? Oh, okay. Raya says, I love that. Thank you so much. All right. Yeah.
Should just riff. No.
Yeah, we totally can. Oh,
Another question.
yeah. Okay. So Rishika asks, how does one transition from one career path to another? If you start off with a dev role but want to switch to managerial roles, how do you bring the proof of work?
Ooh, oh yeah. I love this. I think so I'm gonna just assume certain things about the question. So you've been coding for a while. At some point, you want to go to a managerial role. Me personally, whenever someone comes to me and they ask me about being a manager, I always have these sort of standard questions that I put them through where I'm like, why do you want to be a manager? Right. And if they say something like, well, it's a seat at the table and I get to make decisions and all the stuff. And that's valid, but it often is like not really like, it's the same way when we were talking about becoming a coder. And I was saying how you should understand what it means to be a developer. The same is true about being a manager, right?
Yeah.
Which is it is thankless. You will never get credit for anything else in your life. You have to have a certain temperament and be a person who, for me, nothing makes me happier than seeing someone else succeed. But there is also this category of manager, which I think the worst characteristic of a manager is someone who like competes with someone who works for them, like is never happy for your success kind of thing. So in the spirit of this question, let's say you've done all that internal work, you really want to be a manager, right? Like, you've kind of put it through its paces. In terms of that, the whole transition, I think you have to take there's both the philosophical approach, and then there's the like pragmatic approach, right? Because if it's something that you like actively want to do as a career, then there's these questions that you have to ask to make sure that you are in a place where it is even possible for you to do that, right? What do I mean? So let's say you're at a 10-person startup and you want to be a manager. It's like, well, that might be hard, right? Because like, who are you going to manage? Probably doesn't have that type of structure, right? Or vice versa. You're at a 200,000 company, and they don't take first time managers, right? Like they that's just not a thing that they do. So you have to understand just logistically if that's a thing that you can do. So I think that the first thing that you always want to do is make your intentions known, right? Like talk to your manager, say, hey, I don't have a specific time frame. I am at some point in my career going to be interested in management. Can you give me advice on what the right path is to take? And then a lot of times it's really hard because especially at your kind of small to mid-sized companies, it's really hard to hire a first-time manager because you need someone who can help you grow the company. And that is usually someone who has done that job before, or at least has been in industry for a while. Mm-hmm. So once you make your intentions known to your manager, then you just sort of plot a course for yourself. Maybe on your own, read a bunch of management books, find yourself a mentor who you respect, who does that job and who can kind of tell you the ins and outs of like, what kind of challenges do you face? Or, how would you approach this type of problem? But, what is the thing that you spend your day doing? What is the biggest part of your day kind of thing? Those are good questions, by the way, because if they're like, most of my day I'm in spreadsheets, which is true. And I tell people you will never code again as a manager. Mm-hmm. Most companies, like you kind of got to pick. Yeah. So to be clear, I guess what I'm saying is make your intentions known, make a plan, research and learn as much as you can. And then generally the opportunity will make itself available. Or you have to also be okay with the reality that opportunity might not be available in the place that you're at, right? Like you might have to leave your company, and is that something that you want enough to be able to do that? And if sort of like thinking ahead of like, what does this mean logistically day to day? Because the other thing is like, what you don't want to do is if you say, okay, I want to be a manager, but you never tell anyone, you just wait for people to notice that that's something that you're doing, and then you just up and leave. And your manager's like, oh, I would have totally helped you out. You should have told me. Right? Yeah. So you want to make sure that you kind of talk about it. Or vice versa. If you tell your manager and they're like, that's never going to happen. Well, that's a data point as well. And you have a choice to make, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of different parts of that response to think about, like deciding to be a manager, how to get there. Yeah. Oof. Yeah, we have like 6 more minutes.
We have 6 minutes.
I know. Last minute questions.
Talk about CS50. Oh no, there's another question.
Oh, okay, let's see. Miriam says, how can I approach young girls and minorities to get interested in pursuing a career in tech? In my country, the number of women in tech is decreasing because of the constant prejudices our own society has created.
Oh, that's interesting. I think appealing to, like, finding the thing that is appealing to whichever group or demographic that you're talking to. So I'll give you a parallel kind of analogy, right? Like my fun fact that I always tell people is like, I'm in 3 knitting books, right? Like I'm a really good knitter, right? And it's making a comeback. Don't judge. How dare you judge me, Lizzie? It is super hipping. All the cool kids do it, especially in COVID, right? We were all knitting up a storm.
That's true.
But so I think I've taught like a lot of people to knit over the years, and the thing that determines whether or not people really take to it, because almost people who want to learn, they have that initial motivation, but they'll either like just totally peter out, or they'll, keep going. And what generally is the determining factor is that starter project. And some people will be like, oh, I saw this really beautiful, like patterned Fair Isle sweater. Like, I want to make that. And I'm like, oh, no. Like, no, let's start with a pot holder. Let's start with a single garter scarf or something, right? Because you need to get that enthusiasm going, that feeling of accomplishment early on, right? And the same is true of this question, right? Like if you, it's the same way where, oh my gosh, the whole thing about the CS exam, how the CS exam being taught in Java, and the dropout rate, particularly among young women, was just super high. And then this one professor, he wrote this thing like How to Think Like a Computer Scientist. It's really great. I highly recommend it. He published it online. It's free. And he what he did was, like, for the first half of the class, he started teaching in Python just so they could get the concepts, and then he'd switch over to Java so that they could learn to take the AP exam, right? And the same is true here. So, like, what is that thing? Like, could you do something that's like, I don't know, like culturally relevant or important? Could you make a game out of it? Could you start with like Glitch or something like that? That's kind of fun just to get them used to the concepts. I think that is just like, if you just get that little spark of enthusiasm, then you can almost certainly draw people in. And then, but the constant prejudices, that's a hard one, right? Like I think I do not, you're right, that is a broader thing to solve. So I'm not sure about that. I think maybe if it's just similar to in my own community, right? Like people not seeing Black people or Black women, the more that they see people who look like them doing it, that mindset does have to change. It's not overnight. It takes time, but just little by little. Yeah.
Going back to something you said earlier, I think like CS50 also starts off with Scratch. I think it's like kind of a fun way to get started, and people like make a game or something like that.
Totally.
Yeah. Definitely a huge challenge is like those prejudices. Okay, I don't know if anyone else has a last question. We might be able to get to it, or we can finish up a little bit early. Let's see.
No, nothing about knitting.
Knitting recently? Are you working on any projects?
Oh, always. I'm starting a sweater. I just started a sweater. I'm going to do a scarf soon. Yeah, I'm on Ravelry. Yeah, yes, I haven't posted any projects, but I am on Ravelry. That site is a black pit of you just go in and you just never leave. Like you just start. It's amazing. It's been. I just want to say it's been so great. What a way to spend a Saturday afternoon. Well, it's afternoon here in San Francisco, and it's not snowing. So, so thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. It was really great.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. It's been so awesome to have you. It's been awesome to hear about your experiences and just learn from you and get advice. I think I really enjoyed it. I think everyone here in the chat also did. Yeah, thanks so much for being here, Arquay.
Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Yes, you too. All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.